Hello, welcome to Scrap Time. My name's Christine and this video is part of the Inky background series and we are going to be discussing texture pastes. Now in this video we're going to do Crackle texture paste and then Opaque matte texture pastes. And we're going to start with Crackle. So first off, I'm just going to show you a few samples. So here I put the Crackle paste and you should be able to see some of that texture coming through. And the thinner it is, the smaller the crackle, the bigger, the larger the crackle. And so some of these brush strokes, there just wasn't even enough really. There isn't much crackle there. I had a little bit more there. You should be able to see it. So on this one down here, I put the crackle. And it just adds, again, that sort of tone-on-tone texture after I had to paint this through. And so it just adds that little bit of antiquing in a sense because it's all cracked and old. That adds some fun texture to your project. Now here I just want to show you, it's very small because it was very thin, but you can put crackle on top of another texture. So I had my multi-medium through my stencil here and I put the crackle on top of it. And here I just want to show you that the crackle goes on white. So if you are thinking of using crackle, I would probably put it on first. And I'm going to be painting up a sample because now I have to incorporate this into my design. So like here you can see I haven't fully incorporated yet. You're seeing like you painted crackle on this. Whereas on this one, I tried with the pinks and that to put more into it. And then after I stamp over it and do a few more things. But if you want to use crackle, I would do it on your first layer surface. I wouldn't wait until you've already painted it. You want to do this earlier. So I'm going to just show you. I have this sheet here that I had gel pressed and it has the numbers. So I'm going to put a sheet under it so some of the excess will sort of go through like a stencil or that. So I have my crackle and you can see it's very thick. I like to use it with a palette knife. You just pick some up. It looks thicker than it is. When you do it, it's actually sort of soft. So I'm going to pick some up on my palette knife and sort of rub it on. And so as I said, if it's thick, I'm going to get some big cracks. And then if you thin it, it's going to be small cracks. So this is just how you would apply it. You can use a brush if you want. I just like the palette knife because it gives you a bit smoother to it. I'm going to pull this off my other sheet and you can see I have some numbers there. So maybe those numbers will crack. It might give me a neat little finish to that page. And then I have this one here, and I'm going to set that aside to dry. And we're going to come back to this page in a moment. So I'm going to come back to painting it, but before I do, I just want to talk about the texture paste. Now, this is a Ranger product and they call it texture paste. They have the exact same product under the distressed label. If you go to a store and you see modeling paste, molding paste, texture paste, they're all the exact same product more or less. They're going to give you the same outcome, just everybody has given it a different name. So many craft companies have their own pastes as well. You would use them all in the same way. So for this one, I had used it through a stencil and then I put more inks over it and some of the inks catch around it, some of the inks cover it. You want to, if you're using a texture paste, I think the Ranger one you can use with your distress inks, but some of the other ones that might be smoother work best with like an acrylic based paint. And then here's another sample and you can see where it sort of went off and where it caught. And then this is what it's like when you put it on. So it is white in this case, and sometimes having that little white pop on top is good, and other times you want to color over it. So it all depends the look you're going for. You don't always have to cover over the white. Sometimes when you're just adding some texture, you might want to leave it white. So I'm going to apply some texture paste to this. I just need to grab my stencil. I'll use this stencil. It's a dot vortex, just to show you. So you use this the same way. You have your palette knife. This one's a little thicker than the other one, and you're just sort of doing it like you're icing a cake. And as I rub it in, I'm also rubbing it off the top. So I sort of push it in and then rub it off so I'm not wasting. And then you lift it off, and you can see, even though it was a very small stencil, how thick it is, that it just holds those shapes. And you can get a very cool design. Now you might ask, I may show you something similar later where I'm doing it with gesso. And the difference between using a texture paste and gesso, although they'll both give you the white dots, this one keeps the raise to it, hence the texture paste. It will have that feel to it, whereas a gesso will go flat like a paint. So I'm going to put this aside now. And I'm going to bring in my sample here. So here I have my texture paste dots here, and I have Crackle. And so I made it really thick. So you can see I have really big crackles right down to tiny crackles that are all within my little die cut here. And then along the top, some other different size crackles. So first I am going to put on an ink. I'm going to use my Liquitex inks. And I'm just going to put some ink on it. And I'm going to spritz some water. So an ink is good because it's going to get into the crevices. The inks don't have any sort of body to it. So it's not, right now you might not be able to see the design, but there's not enough texture in this paint to fully cover it. As you see, it's going to just go flat. And this will help to bring out all that texture. Now I can cover up it like that, or as it dries, I can take some off. I'm going to dry it a bit, and you can see over here too in the texture paste how it's pushing it off a bit because it's very liquid ink versus a paint. So I'm going to dry this a bit though. So now you can see as we're drying it, even though it was covering the texture paste, it's now starting to pop through. So I'm going to go over with So inks are great because now we can see all the little texture there popping off. We have the texture here from the die cut from the other day, and even some of the texture from the texture paste. So I just want to show you, what if you were to use a heavier body paint, and why you shouldn't use a heavier body paint. So I have Dina Wakely's turquoise here, and her paints are a heavy body. I'm going to just put some on. So Liquitex basic paints, if you use them, are a medium body, whereas Dina's are a heavy body. So the thing with using a heavy body paint is you can completely cover up what you just did. So with the texture paste, you might want that. You might be like, I want to cover this because then I'm going to put something else there. With the die cuts, you can even, like with the paint, almost completely fill it in. However, you can use it as a dry brush and just go over it. So you can use a heavier body paint if you use it with a light touch. You just don't want to use it full strength because it's going to cover up everything you do. And over here where I put a lot, I can spritz it and take some off because it's still wet. So you just want to be careful depending the paint you're using. So if you do want to use an acrylic, you just be careful that you're not covering it. But if you're using it with a light touch, you could get some neat effects. I'm gonna spritz a bit out of here. Take some of that paint off. And that's the other thing too. If you do put too much paint on, give it as long as it's still wet, you can give it a bit of a spritz and take a little off. But you can see over here now with the texture how it's starting to look really cool with the two different blues. You're getting a lot of that texture. With the texture paste over here, we put a lot of paint on it, so we're losing some of that, but you can go over later with another color and still rub it over. Let's see. I only have inks here, but I have a darker ink. I'm going to put on the table and just see if I can rub a bit of color over it. So if you just play with your color, now a bit of those little textures are popping out because I'm just trying to rub the color on top. Let's see, even with this, if you're just sort of a drier brush rubbing it on top, you'll be able to pick up some of that texture. So that's the Crackle paste and the texture paste. And then as well, we still had our die cut down here. So a few ways that you can add texture to your project. As I say, I think you should do the Crackle paste as a lower level, so you're not dealing with how to incorporate later, whereas the texture paste you can add at any point. Thanks for watching. Be sure to give our video a thumbs up and subscribe to Scrap Time videos on YouTube. And for more Inky backgrounds, be sure to check out the Inky background playlist.